Okay. All right, well, welcome. My name is Kevin Wise, also known as the Buffalo Beer Biochemist. I have a web page that I do a blog on beer. I also write weekly write-ups in the Buffalo News. You might have seen on the online version at buffalo.com, it's called Beer Matters. So I do lots of write-ups on the Buffalo News, for the Buffalo News, but also what I'm here to talk to you about today is the work that I've been doing in conjunction with ECC. So for my third job, I actually teach one of the brewing courses at Erie Community College. And so for those of you that don't know, this is their second semester of a 2-semester brewing certificate program, state certification. And so the students at the end of this semester will have a certification in brewing, service, and sciences. So we have brought a lot of beer for you today, and we brewed it for a reason. And my goal today is to show you the different reasons and why we did what we did to the beer. So how many people here just started drinking craft beer in the past 2 years? How about 5 years? Okay, so everybody's pretty much around that 2 to 5, maybe 10 years, right? And so when I grew up in Niagara Falls, I had both kinds of beer when I grew up. I had Labatt's and Molson, right? But now we have lots of other kinds of beers. And so what I want to do today is highlight the science of the ingredients that you're going to be drinking. So the first beer that's coming around, you can sip it if you like. The rules are if you don't want any beer, just give them the old blackjack, hold them, don't, no more cards. But if you do, feel free to take one. You can either put it in your own glass or just drink it right out of the Jello shooter we have for you, okay? Jello shots. Sorry, they aren't Jello shots. My students heckle me, it's funny, even my own students are heckling me back there. Okay, so before we begin, a few words of thanks for the people that made this possible. Some of the people that made this possible. So we had a recipe developer, actually one of the best brewers in the city in my opinion, Rudy Bob Watkins. Formerly of Community Beer Works, now he's going to be the head brewer at Thin Man Brewery, which is going to be on Elmwood Ave. But we solicited him to come in and talk about our recipes a little bit and make sure that the students were developing the recipes from an expert point of view. Andrew Harden, who's walking around here today, is actually in charge of the VIP area. But also he is a brewer at Community Beer Works and has his own company called Prepared Beer and Food, where he will do food and beer pairings. So he focuses on really the flavor combinations of food and beer. The Sultans of Swig, of which I am a proud card-wearing member, are one of the homebrew clubs here in Buffalo. So not only did they donate us the use of some equipment outside at the booth, you saw a big box. They helped donate that, but lots of other expertise and services along the way. And then all of these students had the choice of, a lot of them have internships. And so they have internships at places like 42 North, who's here, Rusty Nickel, who's here. And so they've gotten ingredients from them and Flying buys it. So not only did these companies donate time and knowledge to the students, but they also donated ingredients in most cases. ECC picked up the tab for the rest, and the students were off and brewing. So they had a choice of either brewing the ingredients either at home, which we call home brewing, or at school, which was school brewing, I call it, right? So we got together one night and said, okay, whoever doesn't have this equipment at home, feel free to come on in and we will all brew together and have a good time. Of course, no beer was drank during the brewing of that beer. Wink, wink. So some of these pictures were taken, and these students really ran with this idea. So the idea that I proposed was, our goal was to highlight one of the 4 ingredients in beer. So what's the biggest, largest ingredient in beer? Water! Water, yay! All right. What's the second biggest ingredient in beer? By volume? You sure it's not alcohol? All right, we'll get there in a minute. Okay, so their goal, so we have 30 students, and so this was a monumental logistic effort to organize 30 students into brewing groups, right? But here was my idea. Let's split them into groups of 3, and let's have them brew a beer to highlight one of the 4 main ingredients in beer. So water, yeast, malt, hops, okay? And so we sought to do that, and we went through the whole process of, again, recipe development. Is this really going to work? And we had an expert look at the recipes, and then we went on to brewing it. And we said, okay, what is this beer going to taste like? And then we tasted them last night. Actually, we got together and tasted them the night before Beerology. And so we did that to make sure that they were actually good. And surprisingly, not surprisingly, they were all great. Right? So the first one you have, we'll get to in a minute. Everybody has the first one? Yeah. Okay. Cheers. Good. You guys can take a break for a second then in the back. So we're going to start with the lightest beer in terms of color and also probably in terms of flavor, I would say. Okay? And so this beer was made as through the accent of yeast. So our goal here was to accent the ingredient yeast. So everybody knows that you're drinking a fungus right now, right?
Yes.
You're okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, so fungi have actually a very important part in our everyday lives, either economically and especially in the brewing and wine industry. So Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which actually means sugar fungus, is the little guy you see right here. And every time that little guy makes another cell, a daughter cell, it leaves a little bud scar. So you can actually, with a really good microscope, you can actually see these cells, and every time they grow a new daughter cell, they actually leave a little bud scar. And so brewing yeast is so good at doing this, it can have up to 20 or 30 bud scars on each cell. So these cells are made, they've been cultured over years and years of artificial selection in the brewery to really do one thing. That is eat sugar and give you alcohol. Okay? So here's an expert diagram by one of my students. Obviously from my age of Pac-Man generation, right? So here we have yeast, and so what we like to say is that yeast sweats a lot. And so when yeast is stressed, it will sweat. And it sweats chemicals that aren't necessarily some of the chemicals you want. But nevertheless, it's going to give you a lot of those chemicals. Okay? So the main object of yeast, in brewing yeast, is to eat sugar and sweat out CO2 and also alcohol. And along the way, lots of other flavors, and it's very complicated. The yeast cell is actually very complicated. But, I don't know if you all know this, but yeast are very similar to the same cells that are in your human body. So yeast have something, I believe the number is like 40% of the proteins in yeast have a similar protein in humans. And so there's actually studies being done now where they can actually take a human gene and put it in yeast. It's called humanizing yeast, and it will actually make that gene and work in yeast. That's how similar those cells are to our cells. Okay, remarkable. Way different than bacteria. So a lot of people think yeast are like bacteria. That could be farther from the truth. They're actually more closely related to us than they are bacteria. Okay? So, what kind of effects does yeast have on flavors? Well, it has a lot of effects on flavors. So before I get to that, let me ask you a question. What did you get out of that sample? I know it's been a little while, but...
Delicious.
Delicious? What else? What kind of descriptive flavors would you say you got out of that sample you just had? This is the interactive portion of the talk.
Very mild.
Very mild.
Banana.
What?
Banana.
Banana? Good.
Sweet.
Wheat?
Sweet.
Sweet. What else?
Light.
Hey, I heard someone say it.
Light.
Light? I heard something else. Somebody say clove?
Humidity.
It's like clove. I heard clove back there, right? So again, these are some of the byproducts of this stressed out yeast. So what these students tried to do is we had two groups of yeast groups, right? So we had 3 students make one yeast beer, 3 students make a completely different yeast beer, recipe beer. And so one of them was called Wise Guys Hefeweizen, and so that one is going to be on tap outside as soon as I believe this one is kicked. So we had 9 beers total we brought to Beerology. I don't know if you guys know that. So there were 2 in each group, and then 3 in the water group, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the one that you had, we called Uncle Esther. So that would be funny if you're a science nerd like me, and a play off Uncle Fester, right? But so here's this little sweating yeast again, and so they really tried to stress this yeast out. They put this yeast on the treadmill of brewing, right? So this yeast was secreting lots of different chemicals, right? So what they also tried to do with this beer, right? This is the Bud Light Saison, right? So what they tried to do was make this beer with the same base recipe as Bud Light, but brew it with a different yeast. Think about that for a minute, right? So you might have got really light, right? You're at a craft beer festival, right? And that beer was really light compared to some of the other beers you've been drinking today, for sure. But the one thing I wanted you to pay attention to is the flavors that that yeast is going to give it. And so this was a Saison yeast. And so any of these flavors, if I asked you what that beer tasted like, if you said any of these flavors, you would have been correct. And that's the beauty about craft beer drinking, is that everybody gets a little something different out of the beer, right? So some people might say, oh, I got cloves, or I got banana, or apple, or I got barnyard, right? You can get barnyard out of beer, right? I actually had a gentleman come up to me after the first talk and say, I'm so glad you said that. I've been drinking beer, and I never realized where I got that idea from. I used to work on a farm, and it tastes like barnyard, like the cows. I said, okay, that's cool, right? All right, so the second sample is going to be coming around in a minute. And so we're moving right along to water. And so it's really kind of challenging to talk about water and what effect water has on beer. But water is somewhere around 94% of your beer. So it's a very typical home brewer's, I'm not going to say mistake, but it's an assumption that your water is going to be good enough to brew beer. So anybody homebrew in here on a regular basis? And have you ever checked your water?
Yes.
Right, so maybe a few people have, right? And what do you check it for? What do you care about when you check the water? Chlorine, right. What about anything else? Can you check anything else?
Hardness.
Hardness, right, yes. And microbiology, so there are any microbes in the water, right. So here's my hometown of Niagara Falls. I grew up actually right under the falls. No, just kidding. But there's two pictures up here. Anybody know what those are two pictures of? Yeah, gentleman up here says that's Hill Farmstead. Anybody know where that is from? Anybody English?
Vermont?
No? So good guess. This one's Vermont. That's a good guess. This one is actually the famous Burton-on-Trent Tower. So if you ever had Bass Ale used Burton-on-Trent water, okay? So the water is known for being, I'm going to show you the numbers for this, the water is known as being incredibly hard water. And when I say hard, I mean full of ions, full of chemicals, okay? Hill Farmstead is this picture. They are kind of very secretive. They're known right now as being one of the top breweries in all of the United States, if not the world, for the quality of their beers. And a lot of people have pinned the quality of their beers on the water quality that they have. So a lot of people think that their secret is their water. They use well water in Vermont. It's northern central Vermont. It's about, I think, an hour and a half away from Burlington east, north. Hour 45, thanks. So again, water is going to be about 94% of your beer. So in history, especially in European cities, this water quality was very important, and it made some really great beers, right? Again, a gentleman over here said, we don't want chlorine in our beer. So you got to usually filter your beer to get rid of any chlorines. Nobody wants a beer that tastes like pool water, right? That's disgusting. So we get rid of the chlorine. In general, good tasting water is going to give you good tasting beer, right? And bad tasting water, not good tasting beer. So here's that water profile from the European cities I was talking about. And the one I just wanted to really point out was this one down here. I know you can't read it back there, I'm sorry about that. But basically, these are parts per million of different kinds of chemicals in water. And you can see something, anybody ever have a Pilsner? So what does a Pilsner taste like? In general. Is it strong or crisp or light or what is it? Crisp and light and a little flavorful, little Saz hops on the end, right, sometimes. But they're very low in minerals. So that water is very soft water. And some of the water like Burton-on-Trent, this number is 820. I will tell you right now that the other highest number on this chart, I think is 350. So you're talking about tons of this chemical, which is actually sulfate. So we can, as brewers, adjust the sulfate concentration of our beer. So we sought out to do that. So the water groups, we actually had a great idea. We were going to make a beer made with snow. So instead of water, we were going to use snow. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, that's probably pretty dirty, right? Well, we would have filtered it, but that wasn't the big problem on brewing a beer with snow. You know what the big problem was? There was no snow. There was no snow. In February in Buffalo, there was no snow. It was amazing, right? So again, props to the great winter we've been having. But what we did do was we fooled around with what the students did was mess around with the gypsum concentration. So again, this Burton-on-Trent water was so famous that they actually call adjusting this kind of water, they call it Burtonization of water. So you can actually add in calcium sulfate and adjust the concentration of sulfate ions in your beer. And that's going to buffer it. It's going to give you a harder time lowering the pH. It's going to make the beer taste different, okay? So the first two groups, again, so we had 3 water groups. And the first 2 groups, which you don't have right now, you actually have the third one. But the first 2 groups, what they tried to do was, they had one group, they did the same base recipe, but one group did not Burtonize the water. Whoops. One group did not Burtonize the water, and one group put in gypsum in their water. So there's the only difference in the water was one of them had gypsum and one didn't. And again, we have those out for you to try outside in the podium. But the big difference is, it was amazing. So we tried them last night, we put them next to each other, and right away you could tell the difference. The one with gypsum was crisp. I mean, this sucker was, the bitterness was accented in this beer. So one of the things gypsum can do for your beer, if you're a home brewer, is it can really accent or make that hop bite kind of crisper on your hops, okay? But the one that you did have, and everyone's had it at this point, right? Everyone's had this second one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what do you guys think about that beer? Tell me what you got, flavor descriptors from that beer.
Caramel.
Caramel? What else? Butter? Yeah, actually it's kind of funny. So we tasted it last night and someone said there's a little butterscotch on the front. And that's sometimes not a good thing, but in this case I think it worked out really well. What else did you guys get from that one? Smooth, very smooth, right? Crisp? We're looking for smooth, crisp, right? We have those sulfates in there, so they're going to make that hop nice and crisp, right? And so biscuity is something that a lot of people get out of that beer, very biscuity, right? And so this beer was actually brewed in very true style to the old kind of Burton-on-Trent ales. So they tried to recreate this beer, and I think they did a remarkable job of doing that. Okay, the third ingredient is hops. So, which of the hop genders is more important for brewing, male or female? Female. Why is that? That's where the good stuff is, that's right. So, I don't know what they said back there, I don't want to know. But, so I call hops the accent of beer. So these hops are really going to accent your beer. And now it's a very common perception. If I say hoppy beer, what's one of the first things you think of? Bitterness, right? But this beer is going to convince you that you can have a hoppy beer that is not bitter. So you got to be careful when you have a hoppy beer, because sometimes the hops do not give you bitterness. They give you tons of flavors though, okay? So what we're talking about here, has anyone ever looked at a cone of hops? They're very, I used to think when I first saw this picture, I'm like, oh, they're very sturdy, like picking an apple off a tree, right? But in fact, they're very flaky, and you can actually just break them open with your fingers very easily. And you see in the middle, there's this yellow powder contained in the lupulin glands. And you'll see some beers named lupulin or hop lupulin kind of beers, because they're named after this gland, right? And you can actually buy hop extract. If it's also had medicinal properties as a neurorelaxant. You can actually put a couple drops of hop resin in your tea in the morning, and it's supposed to relax you, neurologically relax you a little bit, right? So that's a picture I took right off of, I think it was on Amazon or something. Some company sells it actually, okay? But if you grind up all this lupulin, you get this kind of fine powder, and then what the hop growers will do is pelletize it into the pellets that you see in a home brew, okay? All right, so it is true, I kind of lied to you a little bit, it is true that you can get bitterness from hops, and that is one of the main reasons why you want to put hops in beer. And the chemistry behind this is actually very simple. It looks very complicated, but it's not very complicated. So what you have here is you have an isomerization happening. And isomerization just means changing the shape of, okay? So this chemical is called an alpha acid. It's a particular kind of acid that just has the chemical name of an alpha acid. And when you boil it, it actually changes into that chemical. So there's a slight conformational change that happens, and that conformational change is very important because that's what gives you bitterness in beer. So the longer you keep your hops in the beer, the more of this you get, and the more bitter your beer gets. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, let's see if you understand. So what happens if you so a typical home brew is about 60 minutes long. So what you'll do is you'll add in hops at the beginning of the 60 minutes, you'll add them in a little bit later, maybe even after you're done brewing. So if you add them in later in the boil, what do you think you're going to get less of? Bitterness. And that's exactly what happened with this beer. Well, this beer actually that you had right now is a combination of all of the above I've been talking about. So we kind of already covered this, but so hops, when you look at a hop catalog, it's just like looking to buy anything else on Amazon or whatever. You go to these hop grower websites and you go, okay, I want a hop that's going to give me a lot of bitterness. I want a hop that's going to give me just flavors. That says aroma on there. Sorry, it's a light color. And then you can have one that'll do both. So you can add it in the middle. It'll give you a little bit of hops, a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of flavor, whatever you want. And again, it's all because of those alpha acids, and there's other kind of acids too. Some of the other acids that are in the beer will give it taste like citrus, floral, woody, spicy, or even citrusy. So there's other chemicals, not just alpha acids, but there's other ones that are important as well. But let's get to the beer you're drinking. So there are two beers. The one we have outside, which I believe is kicked, right? So you won't need to try that one. It was called Baby It's Kolsch Outside, right? And so that beer was made with Equinox hops, and it was nice. And this beer yesterday, when we tried it, nice and fruity and flavorful. It's a great beer. The one that you did have right now is called Who's Your Daddy IPA. And so the story behind that beer is that The female mother of the, so when they made these strains of hops, they knew who the female mother was, but they had it in a field with lots of other potential fathers, and they don't know which hop actually pollinated the female. So we call that "Who's Your Daddy" IPA, right? But the amazing thing about this is that it's kind of what they call an experimental hop. So hop growers will release a small quantity of a hop that's new, and so they'll let homebrewers try it. They'll say, okay, we're not really sure if it's any good because we make hops all the time, so you guys try it and tell us if it's good in beer. And so they send it out to the markets. And so Niagara Tradition had some of this hop, and it was called the Ron Mexico hop, and it was an amazing hop, and I think you're going to see more of that in the future. Another hop they use in this same beer was called the Zaka, which gives it really tropical flavor. So I just kind of ruined my next question, but what did you guys get out of this beer?
Tropical.
Yeah, I know I just ruined the answer to that, but what kind? So let's be more specific though. What kind of tropical fruits did you get out of there? Coconut, banana, pineapple. Yeah, right. Okay. Another thing that was added in here, which is really kind of another ingenious thing they did with this beer, is what they did was they gave it a hop shot. So actually you can buy a syringe of hops. It's hop extract. And you squeeze the hops inside there, and it gives it bitterness, right? So you don't have to fool around with these flowering plants and all this stuff. You just buy a shot and put it right in your beer. Okay, so they did all that with this one. They had an experimental hop, they had the Azaka tropical flavored hop, and then the bitterness shot in there. So you should get a lot of bitterness, but a lot of those wonderful tropical smells and flavors, right? Okay, and then the last one. The last beer. You guys passing out the last one? Oh, here it comes, okay? So the last group of ingredients we're going to talk about today, and we'll be done, is called malt. So what is the one thing, if you had to look at this slide behind me, that you think malt is going to do for your beer?
Color.
Color, very good, you all pass. You all get a beer, it's coming around. So maltsters will actually take the malt, and the process of malting involves putting it in an oven or a kiln, and it will actually bake the malt, just literally bake the malt or roast the malt to certain degrees. And so the longer you leave it in the kiln, the more roasty it's going to get. Oh, thank you. Finally, after 2 presentations, I get my own sip of beer. That guy gets an A in class. Everybody else, you get a B. So what they tried to do with this one was accent the malt. So let's take a look at the malts real quick. So some malt terminology you may or may not be familiar with, but again, my goal is to try to educate you a little bit on this stuff, is the grain bill. So when you hear a brewer say grain bill, what you should think about is all the malts that they use. And as a novice home brewer myself a couple of years ago, I thought that dark beers are made with dark malts and light beers are made with light malts, right? Does that make sense? But you don't need that much dark malt to get a really dark beer. In fact, if you had 15 pounds of malt and 1/2 of those pounds is dark malts, you're going to affect the color of your beer. So you don't need a lot of dark malts. In fact, so what we have is what we call the base malt. And that base malt is the one that's predominantly the malt that's used to make most of the beer. And then brewers put in specialty malts on top of that. There's also adjuncts. And so adjuncts here are wheat, oats. Anybody have an oatmeal stout before?
Yeah.
What's an oatmeal stout? What's the primary feel of an oatmeal stout?
Creamy.
Very creamy, right? Very creamy. So that's due to the presence of these oats mixed in with the barley, right? Rye, corn, sorghum, rice, millet, all these can give the beer different kinds of textures especially and different kinds of color, okay? So there was a scale developed, there's actually a color wheel, and so when you brew your beer, you can actually hold the beer up to this color wheel and you can say, okay, my beer is a pale amber, okay? Does everybody have the next beer? Yes. Everybody's good? Even I got one, which is good. So another very important thing that malts do for a beer is they increase the alcohol potential. So again, as a novice home brewer, I didn't really realize that the way you get more alcohol is not brewing it longer. I thought you just brew it longer and makes more alcohol, right? The yeast just eat more and make more alcohol. But you give it more sugar to start with. So remember that little Pac-Man drawing at the beginning where the yeast eats the sugar. More sugar, more sweating of alcohol, right? So if you put a lot more grain in your starting homebrew mix, you're going to get a higher alcohol percentage, right? Everybody knows how, if you're a home brewer, you know that's true, right? So color, alcohol potential, some other ones very quickly, flavor and aroma. Obviously this beer tastes like none of the other beers you had, right? So what does this beer taste like?
Coffee. Delicious.
Coffee? What else? Delicious? Yes, I agree with that one. Roasty? Caramel? I heard caramel. Anybody say chocolate? Yes, thank you. Right, so all those flavors. So do you think, so this is very common, brewers can actually put coffee in beer. Do you think we put coffee in this beer? We thought about it. So the students actually thought about it, well, let's mix in some coffee. Some of the breweries upstairs actually do, they mix coffee in with their beer, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, it makes the beer taste damn good. But we actually, the students tried to recreate a beer that tasted like coffee, but it had no coffee in it. So I think you'll agree that this beer, this is one of my favorites by the way, nice coffee flavor and yet not one drop of coffee in there, okay? And so this is kind of to summarize that. And so the other beer that we have outside is called Smokey the Beer. It's a Bamberg Rauch beer. It's gonna have a nice smoky, almost ham-like flavor to it. So smokiness to the point of almost ham. And some people like to go ham and some people don't. Right. But this beer that you drank or are drinking currently is called The Best Part of Waking Up. If you're not thinking of the jingle in your head, is porter in your cup. Right? So the question was, is it possible to brew a coffee flavored porter without actually using coffee? And I think the answer is going to be yes, absolutely, right? So to do that, they use kiln. There's a malt called kiln coffee malt. So surprisingly, not surprisingly, it tastes like coffee, right? Okay, so with that, that's going to bring an end to the presentation, but I'd like to, if you could, give a cheers to the students in the back. Enjoy your time at Beerology. If you want any more information about the program, or about myself, or the blog, or anything I do, everything is the literature and all at the table behind you. Enjoy the rest of Beerology. Thank you very much.